She had $300 left when the clerk at the county tax office slid the paper across the scratched counter and said, "If you really want it, it's yours for $250. The word yours felt like a door cracking during a storm. Mara Reed signed with a hand that had learned to look steady even when it wasn't, breathed out, and tucked the deed into the inside pocket of her coat next to the emergency granola bar she'd been promising her daughter all morning. "Is it really a house?" 9-year-old Lily asked, eyes too old and too bright. "It's really a something," Mara said, managing a smile that didn't collapse. Outside, the sky was the pale gray of unpolished spoons. Wind slid across the fields and lifted the ends of Lily's scarf. The clerk had called it a ruin, a foreclosed estate no one wanted because the roof sulked and the pipes remembered only winter. But ruin was just a word people used when they'd stopped looking for a way in. Mara had slept in a car that refused to start twice a week, in a motel where the carpet kept its secrets, in a shelter where the rules were courage dressed as caution. A ruined mansion with walls and a door, and a chance to be warm, sounded like deliverance written in dust. They followed the county map down a road that forgot itself, past silos hunched like shoulders, past a boarded church that still kept its steeple out of habit. Snow from last week clung to the ditches in tired drifts. When the trees opened, the house rose out of the thinning brush, a big-boned stone thing with a face that had once been proud and now wore its ivy like a second skin. Windows blinked with grime. Icicles gripped the eaves like teeth. A porch slouched under the weight of a century. "It's beautiful," Lily said, and in that moment the word meant hope with a coat on. "Let's see if it says hello," Mara answered. The front door didn't. It was chained. Around back, a service entry had forgotten its lock. The lower panel had swollen and split, and the wood tasted like rain when her shoulder asked it to move. The door gave with a small gasp, and they stepped into the kitchen of another era. Tall ceilings, beadboard walls the color of old butter, a farm sink with iron ribs, a cast-iron stove that would have been handsome if it hadn't been abandoned. The air was colder than outside, a layered cold that felt like waiting. Their footsteps sounded like a story trying to remember itself. "We can make it warm?" Lily said, with the neat certainty only children or engineers use. "We can try," Mara said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear to keep from crying. They toured like thieves scouting dragons. The dining room still kept the shape of a long table in the scuff marks on the floor. The parlor held a mirror that had seen too much and kept it anyway. A staircase climbed in a slow curve, as if it had all the time in the world. On the second floor, bedrooms wore wallpaper in the patterns of other people's summers, ferns and faded roses, and carpets that sighed when the light touched them. They chose the smallest room under the eaves because it felt like a hand-cupping warmth. "This can be ours," Lily said, placing her palm on the wall as if blessing it. "Just for now," Mara answered, the way you answer a wish you want to keep from breaking. They ate half the granola bar each, their breath fogging the air, and Mara went hunting for a miracle that looked like a boiler. In the basement, the stone walls were damp with the kind of honesty old houses practice. Her flashlight found the beast in a corner, big and riveted, a good machine that had been told to sleep too long. A gas line ran along the wall, A tag fluttered on a string like a small, brave flag. Shut off 2018. She followed the pipe to the meter, turned the valve a quarter inch, and listened with a mechanic's prayer in her throat. Nothing exploded. Back downstairs, she bled the air from the line, nudged the pilot, coaxed blue from stubborn, spoke to the iron the way her father had taught her when teaching had been the easiest way he knew to love. The flame took. The boiler chuffed and found a rhythm, and upstairs the radiator in the small room ticked and then sighed with heat that crept into iron like dawn under a curtain. Lily pressed both palms to it and laughed, a sound so clean the house looked up. They worked until dark, sweeping dust into careful piles, dragging a rug from the hallway and beating its ghosts out on the porch, taping plastic over the worst windowed windows, moving a twin mattress that had survived upstairs, by conviction alone. They washed their hands in water, the color of patience, until it ran clear. Mara found a single light bulb that agreed to live a little longer when pleaded with, and when she pulled the chain, the room filled with a light so thin and beautiful it felt like forgiveness. "We did it," Lily whispered, as if they'd tricked the cold into believing in them. Night in a new place is a teacher, with a soft voice. Every creak sounded like a question. The wind braided itself through the trees and pressed its face to the glass. Mara lay awake, counting the ways this could go wrong. The roof could argue with a storm. The town could decide caretaking wasn't a job you could declare for yourself. Her old life could remember her number. But underneath the tally was a steadier beat. "You are inside," she breathed. "You are inside, and your child is warm." She slept and dreamed of a dining room full of strangers holding mugs with both hands and listening. Morning understudied sunlight, but managed something like it anyway. They ate oatmeal on the stair because the morning made stairs friendly. The house felt different now, less suspicious of their intentions. They cleaned the pantry and found a small cathedral of mason jars empty, except for the memory of peaches. Lily made a game of naming rooms. Warm room, quiet room, think room, and a little closet with a triangular ceiling that she declared would become the Red Nest. In the library, bare shelves, a window that wouldn't commit to closing, Mara discovered a shoebox of letters bound with fraying ribbon. The top envelope had been slit open and pressed back into shape. The handwriting curved in a confident hand. If you're reading this, you have a good nose for places. We learned that the house listens better if you tell it something true. It might keep you safe if you promise to keep it company. Signed, only M. True. She had been fired in a meeting that lasted 8 minutes and used the word restructure like a synonym for sorry. True. Her mother had stopped answering calls in a language that felt like weather. True. She had bought a ruin for $250 because sometimes you fix the thing you can reach when you can't fix the thing that broke. She whispered those truths to the wood and felt, foolishly, or not, that the house nodded from the rafters. The surprise didn't come as thunder or threat. It came as a small sound you'd mistake for the house settling if you weren't listening. A stuttering tap from upstairs, a faint, irregular and human pattern. "Pipes?" Lily said. "Maybe," Mara answered, which is what you say when you don't yet want the world to be complicated. The tapping continued. A pause, then 3 taps grouped together, tentative. Mara climbed the back staircase slowly, the one servants used when houses were organized by stories they shouldn't have been. On the third-floor landing, a narrow door sat low in the wall, as if meant for hiding or yoga. It had been painted shut a decade ago, then kicked once, then ignored. The tapping was behind it, shy, like a question with a bruise. "Hello?" she said. The tapping stopped. "I'm going to open the door now." The hinge resisted and then relented. The crawl space beyond smelled like dust and old blankets. It was bigger than it looked, a knee-high wedge that ran the length of the eaves, tangled with forgotten things. A suitcase without handle, a pair of roller skates rusted at the ankles, and a pallet stacked with quilts where someone had made a bed out of thinness. In the far corner, a face blinked. A girl. 17 maybe. Cheekbones like alarm, eyes gone wide, hair tucked under a wool hat that had tried its best. She looked at Mara's hands, then at the light behind her, then at the narrow triangle of sky in the little window that had given away her breath. "I'm sorry," the girl said, voice cut into the smallest possible size. "I was just going to stay the night." Lily leaned against her mother's hip, gaze steady. The girl flinched at the sight of the child, then folded in on herself like a map. "You're okay," Mara said softly, holding both hands out, palms up. "The way you do to a stray dog, or the part of yourself that refuses to be found. You're okay." "I didn't touch anything. What's your name?" "June." "I'm Mara. This is Lily. You hungry?" June's eyes filled so fast it was like watching a glass fog. She nodded once and then couldn't stop nodding. They led her downstairs, not by the arm, but by the gravity of warm air traveling from a radiator. In the kitchen, June sat on the edge of a chair as if prepared to run while her body insisted on being fed. Mara set a bowl of soup. Canned, but heat turns humility into cuisine. On the table, slid it toward her, and discovered she could almost hear June's ribs. Lily put crackers on a plate the way waitresses in movies do when tips might show up. June ate like a person who had promised herself she would not cry in front of strangers, and then added this, too, to the list of promises life made difficult. When she could breathe again, she told them the basics. A stepfather who practiced rules like religion and kindness like a foreign language. A mother who measured love in fear. 2 days on buses. A night behind a diner when the temperature explained limits. A rumor that the old house sometimes leaked warmth if you were quiet and asked politely. "I wasn't going to take anything," she repeated, and Mara believed her because the girl kept glancing at the sink like it was a cathedral. The 911 moment sneaked up on all of them. June reached for her hat, as if embarrassed by having been cared for, and the sleeve of her sweater hiked up to show a bruise the color of bad fruit. It wasn't the bruise that made Mara reach for the phone. It was the way June spoke about going back. Not in words. Words can be taught to lie. But in the angle of her shoulders and the practiced way she apologized for occupying space. Mara knew that posture. She had worn it. She also knew some calls were betrayal and some were mercy dressed as paperwork. "June," she said, soft but with steel laced in, "I'm going to call for help. Not the kind that drags you back. The kind that writes things down, that keeps people from pretending you don't exist. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to, but you don't have to go back there." June went very still. "They won't believe me," she whispered. "They'll say I made it up." "I believe you," Mara said, and realized it was the truest sentence she'd said in a year. She dialed 911. "I need an officer for a welfare check," she said calmly. and a social worker if you have one on call. We have a minor at our residence who needs protection and medical attention. She is safe right now. We are safe." The dispatcher asked for the address, the nature of the injuries, whether there was an immediate threat. Mara answered carefully, looking at June so the girl could watch her build a bridge and test each plank. "We're at the old Bancroft place on County 12. The door around back is open, because the front one has opinions." The dispatcher said they were sending someone. "Can you keep her warm?" "We can keep her warm," Mara said, and Lily nodded like a witness. They waited together, heat working its way through the old bones of the house, steam lifting from mugs like patient spirits. June breathed in counts of 4, shoulders relaxing by fractions as the minutes passed without catastrophe. The cruiser rolled up quietly. A woman stepped out wearing a parka and the expression of someone who has learned that arriving softly saves more lives. Behind her, a second car, a social worker with a tote bag full of forms and the kind of boots that suggested she had no illusions about floors. The officer introduced herself as Alvarez and crouched so her eyes were level with June's. "I'm here because somebody called and said you mattered," she said simply. "Can we make a plan that keeps you safe today?" June nodded, then shook, then nodded. Words found her in irregular beats. Alvarez wrote things in a notebook that made paper do good work. The social worker, Miss Donna, asked Mara if she was the owner. "Caretaker?" Mara said, surprising herself with the correctness of it. "For now." Dana looked around and saw what a person learns to see: radiator heat, a child with easy eyes, a girl with a bowl no longer full because someone remembered soup. "If it's all right," Dana said quietly, "we can arrange a temporary placement with a vetted family in town. There's also a safe option for one more night here, if you're willing and if the officer agrees. I'll stay until she's asleep. No one is forced to go anywhere tonight." June looked at Mara the way people look at water after walking a desert. Could I stay here one night?" "Only if you want to," Mara said, and Lily slid a spare pillow onto the mattress without the kind of drama adults attach to courage. Alvarez made 2 calls in language that sounded like safety. Dana produced forms like magic tricks. When June finally lay down under a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and old summers, sleep dropped onto her like mercy. After the cars left, Dana on the porch said, "You did exactly the right thing. Not everyone would have called." "I used to think calling meant surrender," Mara said. "Today it felt like staying." Dana smiled. "Sometimes it's the bravest verb." The house settled into a silence that contained breathing. Mara sat at the kitchen table with the shoebox of letters and wrote one of her own on the back of a grocery receipt. "If you're reading this, we told this place the truth, and it liked it. We chose to stay and to call, when staying meant inviting the world in. Warmth is a decision you make with other people." She tucked the note in with the ribbon. "Is June going to be okay?" Lily asked later. "She's going to be better than she was yesterday," Mara said. "And tomorrow will help her be better than today." The next morning arrived like a measured apology. Light tested the edges of the curtains and slipped high in. June slept past dawn, a small moving shape under the quilt, the kind of sleep that only finds you when a room refuses to let fear wake you first. After breakfast, Dana returned with paperwork in a tidy stack and a gentleness that didn't ask for anything in exchange. Alvarez stopped by too, wearing a knit hat that proved she existed outside her badge. They sat at the scarred kitchen table, while Lily drew a sign for the porch in block letters. "If you're cold and kind, knock." Alvarez explained choices with the patience of a person who had learned how to translate law into human. "There's a family in town who takes in girls," she told June. "Window facing a maple tree. 2 friendly dogs. You don't have to decide now. Tonight you can stay here again if you want." "Can I see the house?" June asked. They went that afternoon. The couple who met them at the door were ordinary in the way heroes are when you aren't looking for capes. A woman with a braid and sturdy laughter. A man whose quiet felt like a blanket. 2 dogs wove around ankles. June stood inside the threshold, hands in her sleeves, and let the room introduce itself. A couch that sagged toward the middle from too many movie nights, a refrigerator covered in drawings, a table with 4 chairs and a 5th dragged in from somewhere else. "Can they show me the window?" she asked. They did. The maple was bare but brave, its branches writing something in air that would make sense in April. "I could try here," she said to the room. And the room, being a room that had made a career out of trying, seemed to approve. Paperwork made its inevitable noises. Goodbyes were awkward in the way honest things are. June hugged Lily first, quick and fierce. When she turned to Mara, she hesitated, then stepped forward decisively. "Thank you for calling," she said, surprising them both. "You're welcome," Mara managed. "We'll come by, if you want. I'll write you a letter," June said, as if the shoebox had whispered a suggestion. On the drive back, the sky practiced being blue. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Lily asked. "I think she'll have people," Mara said, and realized she had just defined okay as accurately as she knew how. The house felt larger without a second heartbeat upstairs, more like a lung learning a new rhythm than empty. Word began to leak, but not the messy kind. Alvarez must have told the right people the right amount. Ellis the mailman told the rest the way mailmen do, carefully, to porches that deserved the truth. The next morning, a woman from the church with the soft bell dropped off 2 quilts with a note that read, simply, "For whoever is cold." A retired plumber appeared after lunch, knocked the way men knock when they also offer, and said he'd heard a rumor about pipes that were trying their best. He left the basement at dusk, whistling, and refused money, like it was an insult, which is how you know someone's been paid in another currency. A teenager from the high school brought a gallon of paint and left his name on a volunteer list Lily invented from notebook paper and tape. A woman named Clara Bancroft called from 2 counties over, voice delicate as old lace, to say she had grown up in the house, that she had watched it go empty, that it warmed her bones to hear people were inside again. "I can't do stairs anymore," she said, "but I can send curtains." The box arrived the following Tuesday. Linen panels, sun-softened, edges hand-stitched where time had nibbled. Mara hung 1 set in the dining room, and the whole house inhaled. With community came bureaucracy. A man from the county office toured with a clipboard and the face of someone assigned to find violations, but hoping for good news. He frowned at wires, nodded at handrails, cleared his throat in the kitchen. "There's not exactly a category for what you're doing." "We're caretaking," Mara said, palms up like a ledger with 2 lines, warm and safe. He studied her, then the radiator hissing helpfully. "All right, caretaking. That buys time." He slid a form titled Provisional Use across the table. "I can't promise much," he said. "But I can promise paper that keeps other paper quiet." She signed, and the sound of pen on fiberboard felt like a small law being born in their favor. Storms still came, because storms don't check permits. March blew through like a choir of doors. A freeze snapped the air's patience and took shingles with it. They learned the trick of towels around windowsills and how to pack snow against the foundation like sandbags in reverse. A branch bullied a dining room window. It cracked, protesting, and then held. Ellis arrived with a replacement pane salvaged from a farmhouse that had given up and said, "Houses talk to each other." Which seemed true. June kept her promise. She showed up twice a week with sleeves to roll and stories to set down gently. She learned to bleed a radiator until heat walked all the way to the end of the line. She painted the porch railings a stern white that made the whole facade sit up straighter. She wrote letters, too, leaving them in the shoebox. One to the Mara of 2 months ago. One to the girl who would show up a year from now, needing a hot drink and a sentence that didn't ask questions. Lily folded each letter and dated it like a librarian. Evenings filled properly. Someone was almost always at the long table. June doing homework, Ellis reading yesterday's paper because today's was rude, Lily designing an inventory system for socks. Mara cooked in ways that stretched ingredients and memory and the definition of stew. Conversations rose and fell. Occasionally, someone would go still and look around as if surprised to be inside a room that wanted them. Spring arrived by degrees, and then all at once. The maple leafed out with the relief of a creature permitted. Crocuses reinvented purple along the walk. The house, no longer bracing, leaned into the weather like a person with hands in pockets enjoying the exact temperature. Lily's sign went up on the porch in a frame Ellis built from a crate. They added a smaller one beneath. "Ring twice if you're scared." A woman spent an afternoon in the library, crying softly under the pretense of reading a cookbook, then left without leaving her name. Mara found a thank you on a recipe card. "The window looks like hope from here." A man asked to charge his phone, and then stayed to fix a hinge, as if he'd been waiting all day for someone to trust him with one. "What will we do in summer?" Lily asked on the porch steps, bare feet dirty with the right kind of dirt. "When it's not about heat?" "Shade is also a kindness," Mara said. "Cold lemonade qualifies as a mission. We'll learn the summer version of staying." Letters kept arriving, from Clara with stories of long-ago winter parties where the whole town brought soup. From neighbors who'd once tried to buy the house and failed because the bank thought mercy had no resale value. From June, the first time she spent 2 nights away, addressed to the red nest with a drawing of a maple leaf as a careful joke. One afternoon, a call came with the geography of Mara's mother. She let it buzz twice, 3 times, then pressed accept, because telling the house the truth required doing it out loud. "I heard you called the police on a stranger," her mother said, brittle as thawed glass. "That seems like a liability." "I called for help," Mara said, making each word a plank on a bridge. It worked. Silence, then a crack. "You always make things complicated." "I'm learning to make them warm," Mara said, surprised at the lack of anger in it. "If you want to see, you can. If you want to argue, you can do it on your own porch." Another silence, longer. "I don't have a porch," her mother said finally, not quite admitting anything, admitting everything. "We have stairs," Mara said. "They're good for sitting." Her mother didn't come that week or the next, but the conversation left a window cracked somewhere in the structure of things, and sometimes that was all a spring needed. The day the piano in the parlor gave up a note that sounded like an actual C instead of furniture complaint, June whooped and Lily clapped and Ellis insisted on "Happy Birthday," even though it was no one's and everyone's. The song wobbled but found itself, which became a theme. That evening, as the walls kept what little cool the old stone could provide, June added another letter to the shoebox and read it aloud. "If you find this, you might be scared that calling will take something from you. I was. It didn't. It gave me a map. If you're here, you already did the brave part. Tell the house something true. It listens." She tucked the note in, smoothed the ribbon, and turned to Mara with a smile that had learned it could be a default instead of an exception. "I got accepted into the summer program," she said, "the one with counselors and art supplies and dorms with doors that locked in comfort instead of fear. It's 3 weeks. I'll be back to paint the back steps." "The back steps will miss you," Mara said, and somehow they all laughed without leaning on relief. On a Saturday in June, Clara arrived in a car driven by a nephew who parked crooked and confessed he cry-sang all the way at the idea of the house full of people again. They helped her up the newly steady steps, and she stood in the foyer, breathing like a pilgrim. "You've given it a voice," she said, palm on the banister. Mara poured lemonade into mismatched glasses. Lily offered a tour with the authority of a docent. June played a brave line on the piano, and the room decided not to argue with optimism. They ended up in the dining room, because tables magnetize open stories. "My parents always thought this room was too big," Clara said, looking at the empty plates as if they already contained casseroles. "They tried to make it smaller with furniture. You made it bigger with people." And that, Mara realized, was the shape of what they had done. Not fix so much as welcome. Evening folded itself over the ridge, and the house, as if on cue, clicked into its nighttime song. Pipes settling, floorboards summarizing, wind in the maple telling the same patient joke it tells in every season. June and Lily fell asleep in a heap on the porch swing. Ellis dozed in a chair with his cap over his eyes. Clara held her cup with both hands and watched shadows move across the parlor ceiling like weather in a gentler climate. Mara went to the library and opened the shoebox one more time. She added a final card not to finish anything, because nothing about this was finished, but to mark a place you'd want to return to. Today, the house learned our names. Today, we learned its. If you're cold and kind, knock. She closed the lid and set it back on the shelf. In the kitchen, the kettle hummed low as a lullaby. The porch light sent its small circle into the dark, and the dark minded its manners. When Mara stepped outside, the night air smelled of cut grass and new history. She sat on the top step and listened hard enough to hear what stayed. Lily's breath through the screen, June's small snore, the maple practicing summer, the long, low murmur of the boiler promising another morning. She thought of the first hour they'd arrived, of the brittle cold and the door that had given with a gasp, of the phone call that could have been a surrender and became instead a choosing. Disowned had turned to owned by doing. Ruin had turned to refuge by use. She took the last sip of her tea and whispered to the yard, to the road, to the miles of other houses trying to remember their function. We're here. The house answered the way loved things do. Not with words, but with warmth that didn't need translation. The porch bulb hummed. The sign with Lily's letters caught what little moon there was and reflected it faithfully. And somewhere near midnight, a wagon of teenagers on bikes rode past and whooped simply because the air allowed it. And the sound lifted and bent and settled into the eaves like a next chapter already aware of its first line.